Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny, and this is Smoke and Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy.
Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. Today, we're continuing the series on agricultural conservation and policy. And today, we're going to have a farmer with us talking about his experiences. It's not just any farmer, it's my brother, Josh Ifft. So first of all, Josh, do you promise not to make fun of me? I've never had to ask that before.
No, I do not. Not too much.
I thought you
will
would say that.
I will do my best. You know me well enough that I don't know if I can promise that.
Okay.
I will
No.
hold back whenever
I
possible.
didn't expect too much. That's all right. So you want to get started first? Talk about your operation, what you're doing?
Yeah. Our kind of just the whole operation. Really, we're just kind of a basic corn, soybean farmers for the most part. Over the last, I would say 6 to 8 years, we have inserted quite a few small grains into our operation. We've gotten to the point now we are mostly oats for our small grains. Over the years, we have done some wheat and some cereal rye for seed as well, for cover crop seed. As time has gone on, we've discovered, just from a time standpoint and within our operation, oats really works the best and is probably proven to be the most profitable. So for the most part, we're corn, soybeans, and oats, and like I said, if we need to, we'll mix some wheat in there as well. I mean, another part of kind of our basic operation is, we do have a cover crop seed dealership, and that's kind of where we work the oats in there as well, and sell all kinds of cover crop seed as well. So pretty much it for our deal.
Yep. And so how long have you been a part of the operation?
I believe I came back to the farm in 2006 or 7, something like that. So we're going right about very close to 20 years now.
Okay. So you're not exactly a beginning farmer anymore. That's 10 years by the official definition.
I don't qualify for any of the beginning farmer assistance anymore, unfortunately. I feel like I am.
So you talked about this is a series on agricultural conservation and policy. What do you think about the term conservation? What does that mean to you as a farmer?
As a farmer, just conservation on a whole, to me, I see it as more of a mindset than versus a program or anything like that. I think when it comes to conservation, it's more your approach to farming, the program that you farm with, how you essentially work with nature and do your best to just work with what you have. And growing up, we did a lot. I mean, we hunted and fished and trapped and did all that kind of stuff. And my dad was always big into the conservation and the wildlife thing. And I do believe as farmers, we still do have an obligation to do our best to incorporate practices that at the very best do no harm to wildlife and that side of conservation. I do think that is one thing that kind of gets lost in some of the conservation conversation, is we do have, as farmers, do have an obligation to, like I said, at the very least, to do no harm to the wildlife. And I do enjoy the programs and the projects that we work on that we think are doing more to kind of increase wildlife populations and a lot of the basic things that go along with conservation, controlling erosion, improving water quality. Those kind of things are all about conservation, improving the diversity of, crops and things like that. And I think, I do think the conservation programs that we have in place from a government standpoint are extremely useful as a guide to helping farmers do what they can to promote conservation. And I think one of the biggest things is thinking long term. I think that is, and it doesn't always get talked about or thought of necessarily as a conservation thing. But as farmers, when we think long term and we think longer past more than just a couple years in front of us, I think that's when we start seeing the benefits of conservation and kind of what in our approach to things there.
So it sounds like there's part of it that's values, but it's also about your livelihood. Caring for resources affects the ability of your farm to succeed long term.
Yes,
Could you, I
absolutely.
know you've talked
Absolutely.
about you've talked about the different crop rotations, the cover crop seed business. Could you go into a little bit more detail about how your farm has these conservation practices, if you want to call them that, compared to, say, typical farm?
Yeah, I would say in strictly from a conservation standpoint, what most people would look at and say that's what conservation is. We do have a fair amount of ground in CRP and several other some pollinator programs, field border programs. We do have one farm where we actually took out, I believe it was 25 acres of the farm that was essentially a low spot that they'd been farming for gosh knows how many years and put that into a program. That would be probably the most obvious things where we're doing quote unquote kind of your classical conservation things. From what I believe is just as important to conservation is we are 100% no-till. I say that, and if 1 out of 10 years, if it's getting too late into May, we will vertical till in front of our corn in order to get corn in a timely fashion. But I would say 90% of the time we are 100% no-till in front of corn and beans. We will plan on having a cover crop in front of every acre. It's a little bit like the no-till deal. There's years where it gets too late, maybe especially in front of our oats where we might not put one, but we do our best to put every acre into a cover crop. And like I said, in front of corns and beans, and trying to use multiple species of cover crops as often as we can. Like I said, I do think that having a diversity of crops and diversity of things that you're planting is a big part of conservation and increasing wildlife, insects, birds, all that kind of stuff there.
That makes sense. Can you talk a little bit more about how you balance, like, your commitment to conservation or stewardship with profitability?
Yeah, and I had seen that question there, and I think it's interesting. That's one thing that we go back and forth on with people, especially in our cover crop seed side of things. I had a guy call me just the other day, and a new customer, and we had a conversation, and it was he's talking about a lot of the drawbacks that he'd heard of cover crops and no tilling and things, and it's something that, like I said, we have a lot of discussions about it. And I believe that if you have a cautious, gradual approach to a more conservation minded approach to farming, that you can actually be more profitable than you were in a more conventional setting. And I do strongly believe that. I would say compared to where we were at 10, 15 years ago, and I said we've very gradually over. Gosh, I think Dad started no-tilling beans in the early to mid. We don't do anything quick here. We do things over a very slow. But I think that slow and gradual approach has allowed us to make changes only when we think we can do them and maintain that level of profitability. There are a few things that I would say, when we talk about trying to be good stewards of the lands and balancing that with profitability. I think the most obvious thing that people would talk about is reducing fertilizers, reduce nitrogen usage. And I think nitrogen is a big one on a national level when we talk about water quality and nitrates in the water. And I think that's one of the big focuses they have. I have run a bunch of nitrogen trials over the years, and the flat out reality is it doesn't matter what setting you're in, more side dress nitrogen on corn is going to give you more yield. And it's almost always going to pay and pay very well. So you are stuck in a place there where backing off on nitrogen or applying significantly less nitrogen is probably the more environmentally friendly way to do it. But the reality is it's something that's going to make you a lot of money when you do apply more nitrogen. So that's something that we've had to balance. And in one way we've tried to um, to do that in a way to apply what we would call the necessary amount of nitrogen or the recommended amount from our agronomists is spacing our timing out, putting nitrogen on with the planter, putting nitrogen on with a wide drop side dress that's later in the season when the plant needs it more, putting the nitrogen right by the plant so those roots don't have to reach out way into the middle of the row and get the nitrogen, being as efficient as we possibly can with our nitro has kind of allowed us to balance as well as we could that, like I said, that trade-off between doing our best not to be good stewards of the land, but also farm in the most profitable way we possibly can. We have been able to back off on our dry fertilizers here and there over the years, I think, especially with our cover crop program. As we're seeing more building our soils up there, I do think we've been able to back off on our dry fertilizer when we possibly can. That has been a benefit there, not something we've pulled completely out, but that is one thing. And I've go to a lot of meetings and stuff, and I have heard the comment made by several people, we will not sacrifice, won't sacrifice, the soil health for yield. And that is one thing that I do very much believe there. I think building our soil health has been a very profitable thing for us.
You talked about having this cautious, gradual approach to conservation, and that makes a lot of sense. One thing we hear a lot here, and there's a lot of interest in regenerative ag, is that it can be really stressful if you're doing things in a different way that you've always done them, especially if times are tight and it affects, you make a mistake and it affects your yields, and then that can be pretty tough. Is this something that you've navigated or that you've seen other people navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is especially in with our cover crop business, that's something that we deal with all the time. Guys going from essentially a conventional full tillage program to wanting to plant some cover crops and wanting to essentially switch their entire program around, but only doing it on 40 acres, 80 acres, something, a small section of what they farm. And that's where the difficulty arises, I think, when people have struggles and whatnot in, going into with a more conservation minded style of farming, when they're wanting to go from one system that's completely different than doing kind of a no-till cover crop system. And that is where I think we've been able to see the benefits over the years of kind of that slow and gradual approach. We went from a full tillage program 30 years ago to doing no-till beans. That we slowly worked our way into that. Then we slowly worked our way into doing no-till corn, slowly worked our way into the cover crops. And then we decided, we're going to plant beans green. We're going to wait till, wait till we plant our beans to kill the cereal rye or whatever we have in front of the beans. Each step was taken gradually. So we were able to get our soil to the point where it could handle and it had some more structure to it. And we made sure, we got comfortable with a lot of those different practices and trying new things. Whereas I think we've seen a lot of farmers are seeing they're getting essentially paid a lot of money through some kind of program to plant a cover crop, but they're not able to necessarily take that gradual approach. They're going from a full tillage system or maybe just a no-till bean system with a full tillage ahead of corn, but it's almost too many changes in one year. It's very difficult to do. We've got some very good operators that we've worked with that have done a very good job with it and done it successfully. That's where you see a lot of guys kind of almost horror stories about cover crops where it's costing them crazy number of bushels, especially in corn, where they've done some things that the reality is they just shouldn't have done.
So you talked about profitability in the long term. Now, I'm not going to ask you to show me a balance sheet or anything, but could you sort of break that down into the components of profit and where you think it's coming from? Is it from the input costs, from increases in yields overall, or maybe from increases in yields in bad years?
Is going to be the first thing you got to talk about is yield, because that's where a lot of the money you make, the vast majority of the money makes going to be from. You can't control, to a certain extent, you can't control in our business when all of our corn and beans are going to go to the elevator. We can't necessarily control the price, but I do think the approach we've always taken is we want to maximize our yields and do everything we can to grow a crop as cheaply and efficiently as we possibly can. Like I said, the first thing we want to do is get the very best yields we can. Um, and then we go into finding places that we can cut back or find cheaper alternatives. And one of the biggest things is the no-till in our corn and beans. Our equipment costs, our fuel costs, labor, time is so much less than an operation that's doing a full tillage program. I mean, we're 3, 4, 5 passes less per year through the field. Don't need probably tractors with as much horsepower. We don't have near as much wear and tear on machinery. And those are a lot of hidden costs that have nothing to do with the crop. Um, that we that I think we're doing. That's one of the ways that we're maintaining the level of profitability that we can. We are doing our best. One of the things I've comparing costs. We try to keep our herbicide costs as low as we possibly can. And that's one place where we do think our cover crop program has helped keep our fields cleaner, especially ahead of soybeans. With having that, we went for probably 5 years and used no residual herbicides on our soybean fields. Now we did have a year, I believe 2 years ago, where we had a few more weed escapes, and we have gone back and we will for probably 2 or 3 years to using some residuals in our soybean herbicides, to kind of get ahead of that. But with the goal of in another year or two taking those out, and that's a savings there um, that we think is very real. And like I said, getting our cover crops in a timely manner, getting as much growth as we possibly can out of them. That's another thing that we believe is allowing us to maybe pull back a little bit on our dry fertilizer, because we're building soil health through the plants that have been there and are decomposing, and and using that to maybe pull back a little bit on our dry fertilizer, and obviously fertilizer costs being what they are, and 10, 15, 20, 25%, you can pull back on there. That's real savings that very easily pays for your cover crop seed right there. So I mean, that's a few ways that we believe we're saving on some of our inputs, but not doing anything that's pulling yield.
Yep. Yep. So
And we
as
do
you've
concentrate.
taken this,
One thing I was going to tell you, one thing we do concentrate on is um spending money on the things that give us real and true yield advantages. We don't focus a lot on, and I'm not going to knock the biologicals and that community is at all, really. I think there's a place for that stuff, but we focus on things that have given us major yield advantages. Like I said, in corn, nitrogen. I mean, that's been one of the things that has absolutely paid for itself every time. So we focus more on things like that are going to give us big payouts versus spending a dollar to make a dollar one, which is what we've kind of seen on some of the biologicals and other products like that.
yeah, yeah. So as you've taken this gradual approach, you're trialing things. I'm curious about what the sources of information have been. Like, how do you learn from others, from research? Of course, excluding your favorite land grant economists.
Oh yeah. Yep. No, she gives me good advice on everything I ask, and for sure. Really, we have a tremendous community around, especially where we live here, in being a cover crop dealer. I would say seed dealer. I would say we learn as much from our customers almost as they learn from us, because we have a lot of guys trying a lot of different things, and we get tremendous information from them because we see covers going on in so many different situations, and we can kind of, we'll have one guy over here that has really good luck with this and another guy that has good luck with that, and we get a lot of information from our customers. We've got a very good, we are a seed dealer for Biotil. It's a Saddle Butte Ag out of Oregon, and their representative that we deal with the most is lives in Peoria, about an hour away from us, and get a lot of very good information from him. His name is Brian Wheeland. Very good information from him. Um, our agronomist, Ken Ferry, he's also the Farm Journal's agronomist. Just from a basic farming standpoint, not necessarily a cover crop or conservation standpoint, get a ton of advice from him. We work very closely with him on a lot of things. We attend, gosh, as many conferences and everything as we can. We've worked with Practical Farmers of Iowa a fair amount, gone to quite a few of their meetings, participated in some of their programs. Very good information coming out of there. We have, we put on our own actually cover crop appreciation meeting in August of every year, and we have speakers come to that every year. Always get a lot of good information out of them. And I just wanted to reiterate again, other farmers is the biggest thing, because you're going to learn more from other farmers and their successes and their failures than anything. Like I said, that'd be number one. But there is tons of good information out there. We work very closely with our local USDA NRCS office, especially on conservation stuff, and the small amount of EQIP and CSP programs that we do participate in, which is not very many, but we do get very good information from them. But I think it's there. There's so much information out there about cover crops and conservation, and I just think you need to learn from as many of them as you possibly can, and figure out which ones apply to you. I think that's one of the talk about regenerative ag a little bit ago, and I think
Context.
one of the principles of regenerative ag that they actually added here a few years ago was context. I think we all need to figure out. We can all read stories about somebody in North Carolina doing something crazy with cover crops and having success with cover crops in a certain way, but we always need to figure out, how does that fit into my context, and figure out how others' successes and failures can fit into what you're doing and what you want to do.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about any private programs or private incentives that you've participated in?
Yeah, I could do. We've not done a bunch of programs, and that's one thing. I've done a few more than our dad has, that, and we do farm together. We are about 50-50 on acres now, what we farm, and his approach has always been more from a conservation and a cover crop standpoint. Is I'm gonna make it pay without additional money. I have done a few programs over the years. Like I always tell people, it's easy to say when you're 65, 60 to 70 years old and established. It's easy to say that I'm going to do it without additional money. I said when you're 29 like me, maybe not anymore
You've been
with
29
kids
for
and
a while.
everything, raising a family and everything. There's some of these programs that become a lot more attractive when you do that. One of the private ones we've done, obviously it's not all private money, but like I'd mentioned, the Practical Farmers of Iowa has a program where it's a 3-year rotation, planting a legume cover crop after a small grain. I believe that was one of the focuses of that program. That was one of our favorite programs. Didn't get a lot for it. I can't remember if it was $10 or $20 an acre. They're very easy to work with. The information that they got from us, I never felt like they didn't get too much information, but the questionnaires that we filled out during the program, they got very good information. They were, like I said, very easy to work with. The information they got was very valuable. We didn't necessarily need it, but they had marketing opportunities that they were offering people to market their small grains. We were doing mostly oats, so we cleaned the seed and sold it as cover crop seed after that. So we didn't necessarily need that, but there was offering people marketing opportunities. That was a very good program. We've had several of them that aren't public ones. The Illinois got the fall covers for spring savings crop insurance program. That's always been a very good one, very well ran. They make that program better every year. I did one a couple years ago. I believe it was through ADM. And it was just a basic cover crop program. Enrolled most of my acres in it. And that was the program to me, it was about the opposite of the PFI program. They got a crazy amount of information, went back several years. And in my opinion, for the vast amount of information they got about the program and the amount of work they went to, it didn't pay anywhere near well enough. But like I said, I'm not knocking it. It was easy enough to do, but I did think for the amount of information they got, it probably wasn't. I thought it needed to pay better. That was another kind of privately funded program that we did there. But that's been it
So
for
if
the
I could
most
kind
part.
of summarize, okay. It sounds like the amount of payment matters, but also the kind of information that they're collecting from you is a big part of whether these work out or make sense.
Absolutely, and that's more just my personal feelings on it. It's a fair amount of work to get around all your fertilizer records, your chemical records, all your FSA 578 for cover crop planting.
Oof.
Um, and I don't that it's fine to get all that. And I'm not one that says I don't want to share my information too much, but I do believe when you get into programs that require a fair amount of information like that, it does need to pay very well. What's the saying? The juice has got to be worth the squeeze, essentially, in my
Yep.
my opinion there. If you're gonna, if it's an easy program that's simple and I can do it in a timely fashion. I don't worry too much about the payment there. Like that, like I said, the fall covers for spring savings program in Illinois. I mean, that was $5 an acre was it, but it was simple. They've streamlined the process every year. $5 an acre over. Not that we farm a tremendous amount. It still added up and it paid fine, and they said it was a fairly efficient process. But when I think we're getting into years of fertilizer records and, trying to get pretty deep into your production history, I do think that needs to come along with a fair amount more from a payment standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, well let's switch to government programs now. So it sounds like you've participated in quite a few NRCS programs. Could you kind of dig into what you're still doing, what's worked for you, what maybe hasn't worked as well in the past?
Yeah, the just from a conservation standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, we do have, it doesn't add up to a ton of acres, but we do have a fair amount of farms that have some either CRP or pollinator or field border or whatever. They all have different names now, and it seems like the programs switch around fairly often, but are still, wind up being fairly similar. We have a fair amount of fields in those, and that has been probably I really like the CRP program. I think that is as beneficial and has been as successful in taking ground that has been farmed for, however long and probably doesn't need to be farmed. We use it anywhere. anywhere we've got tree lines or hedges around fields, we're able to put in a 60 to 90-foot buffer strip around that field, or at least where the trees are at, allows us to keep trees up, and I think that's one of the big things that probably doesn't get talked about as much as it should, from a conservation standpoint. I think the more trees we cut down, that's, to me, that's just one of the worst things that we can do, when we can take these hedges and everything that divide fields up, just stick a 60 and a 90-foot buffer in there. It's really something that we should do whether we get paid for it or not, but it is nice to have. You also have a landlord that'll work with you to do it too. That's where we've been very fortunate. But do really like
Yeah, absolutely.
the CRP programs. And I'd mentioned the one field.
Yeah. It sounds like mostly continuous CRP.
Yes. Yeah. 10-year. I think they're 10-year programs.
No, continuous.
And
continuous.
What's that?
Continuous CRP.
Continuous? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a general competitive sign up and there's continuous. Oh, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do have several of them. That there was the one farm where we took 25 acres out. There was only a certain amount of acres in the state that they could do that on, and we were able to get it in quick enough that we were able to get that. But yeah, I say most of them have been 8 to 10-year programs with some kind of mid-contract management, and they have actually done, I do believe, a very good job of modifying those contracts. The mid-contract management is significantly better than it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Really like I said, really like them. I've had a couple equip contracts over the years. Back when I was a beginning farmer, I think I had one field that I was able to put into it. That worked out fine. I do think one of the reasons that my equip and equip programs have been very successful is we have our NRCS office is very good people in there to deal with, that we work with very closely. That's made that process a lot easier over the years.
If you think about conservation from the perspective of a farmer, is there one thing that you're optimistic about or something you're pessimistic about with what's going on?
As far as optimistic, the one thing I thought about that for a few minutes earlier, I'm optimistic. I'm very happy that the conversation is being had more on a national level now, especially about regenerative agriculture and focusing on that versus versus trying to take everything organic. I think that's a very, very positive conversation, because in my opinion, regenerative ag is significantly better from a conservation standpoint than the vast majority of organic. But that, like I said, that's not something we have to get into here today. But I'm
you
optimistic.
Got another hour?
Yeah, and I'm not here to make anybody mad either. I better shut the door here.
You're gonna get canceled.
Yeah, I might. That'd be all right. Nobody would know. I like that the conversations being had on a national level, and we try to do, especially like you said, about regenerative agriculture and just awareness. And I think that's just such a good step, and I think it's something that'll, regardless of what administration is in place, I think the conversations there, it's being had, and it's something that people are going to have to think about going forward. Like I said, I'm a gradual change guy. It's the approach that has always worked for me, and I think from a government standpoint, that's in terms of programs and how we approach farming. Any changes have to be gradual, and we have to be very well thought out. Have to be disciplined about what kind of changes we make. But to me, as long as that conversation's being had, I think that's definitely a source of optimism. And but anything I'm pessimistic about, the one thing, and it's not even something that's necessarily pessimistic, but I think when so much of the conversation about conservation and farming practices, so much of it is just cover crops, cover crops, cover crops. And, and obviously we sell cover crop seeds. So I want everybody to plant every acre in cover crops. I think that, that whole the conversation needs to be about the whole more about practices, more about your approach to farming, not just cover
Yep.
crops, but tillage
Yep.
systems, every piece of it. The whole soil health conversation has become strictly about cover crops, and I think we need to
Right.
remember that that's just a small part of it. That we have to get our
Right.
mindset and our approach to farming that has to come first, and we have to make that conversation be about the whole thing instead of just hammering cover crops into. But like I said, we sell cover crop seeds, so plant them on every acre.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in Kansas, I think in eastern Kansas, there's been a fair amount of adoption. In western Kansas, folks can get real grumpy because they're just dealing with so many moisture issues. I mean, it's not that some producers haven't
Absolutely.
figured it out, but it can be a touchy subject. Let's just
Yeah,
say.
yeah, and I can see
All
from that standpoint, yeah, it's a tough sell in that part of the world.
right. Is there one thing that you wished people understood about you better as a farmer or from any other perspective?
I don't know. I saw that question on there. I didn't really know how to answer that. Probably
We
not.
could just pass it. That's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll just
No, we'll
pass
pass
on
that
that
one.
one.
All right. So, final question. You get to change one policy. What do you change? It doesn't have to be conservation. It could be.
Change one policy on the one
Yep.
thing
Change.
that has gotten, and this is just selfishly speaking, it seems like every program that comes along, in order to qualify for it, you have to have some kind of new practice. Well, we have
Oh, yep.
been doing cover crops and everything for so long, and essentially every practice they want, we already have done them. And there's the
Right.
vast majority of these programs we can't qualify for because, and once again, I'd like to take things slowly, and I don't want to throw a bunch of new practices in 1 year. That is the one thing I would say that
Right.
I don't think I do. I realize why it's there. That's more of a selfish part of me wanting to be able to
Yeah.
qualify for more programs. I realize why that's there. I don't, and actually, I probably agree with it. I don't think it's necessarily I don't think a government payment should be there to do what you've been doing when you've been farming profitably. I think it should be there to help people to switch their practices around and get more in line with, the where they want to be there. But like I
Yeah.
said, selfishly speaking, if they could get rid of that new practices thing, I would sure like it.
Well, you're not the first person I've heard that from. And I think there is a tension between sort of policy effectiveness and stretching those policy dollars and sort of fairness. And are you penalizing the people that did it 2 years ago and figured it out? So
Yeah. And
that is
like I said, I don't even
absolutely
look
real.
at it. We probably shouldn't look at it as them penalizing us because we're really not. Like you said, I firmly
Yeah.
believe that, the whether it be most of the conservation practices that we use are very profitable. So, I don't necessarily think we're losing a lot on it. I think that it's just one thing that would make it a lot nicer for me.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. Is there anything else? Thanks for going easy on me so far.
I think that's about all I've got. I sure appreciate you letting me come on here and chat with you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm trying with this series where, you talked earlier about how there's this national conversation. I'm really trying to capture all the different voices and perspectives on what the policies are going to look like around regenerative ag and conservation and, try to understand that better. So it's great to get a farmer's perspective. That's sort of
Yep.
fundamental, I'd
No, and
say,
it's
obviously.
yep. No, and it's something that we do every day, and I very strongly believe in what we do and in how we do it. I tell people all the time, I'm not here to tell anybody else how to farm. I do believe that, it's a free country, and people is, for people can farm and make a living however they want there. But I do
Yeah, right.
from my experience, everything I wholeheartedly believe in what we do, and think not only is it the best for the from a conservation standpoint, but I think it's very profitable as well.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.